So as he mentioned, social collaboration is a huge trend that is just continuing to grow. And what social collaboration tools are basically described as the Facebook for the enterprise. It is a way for companies to build collaboration tools for the company that keep employees within the company without having to breach privacy concerns without having to breach privacy concerns or allow employees to have to use tools like Facebook or Dropbox that would enable to employees to have to go outside the company to share or communicate and keep them inside. Some of these tools are Yammer, Salesforce. Earlier this year, Microsoft acquired Yammer for over $1 billion. Salesforce has also acquired Buddy Media and Ripple earlier this year, indicating that this enterprise is just continuing to grow. Kevin works with Blue Rooster, Bryan with FedEx, both companies that are leading the way in this industry. Kevin, can you explain more about what you do and how that is impacting this industry?
Hey everybody, good morning, thanks for coming. So I'm Kevin Conroy, I'm president and founder of Blue Rooster. We're an interactive agency here in Seattle, and we build advanced UX solutions on top of Microsoft products, primarily working in the SharePoint arena. And we've been working with our good friend at FedEx for a couple of years now on trying to bring them that social collaboration piece into the enterprise. And it's kind of interesting to see that transformation, what's taking place there, and how do we get people to move beyond voicemail, move beyond email, and kind of really start to get disparate teams and groups and countries sharing information. And we've been working on this now, not only with FedEx, but with other companies for the last 3-4 years. And it's interesting at how kind of new it is and some of the things that are taking place there. And I think, why don't we talk to Bryan here and tell us a little bit about what's going on at FedEx?
Lots of things. Just a few. So I'm Bryan Barringer. I manage collaboration implementation for the enterprise for FedEx. Been doing that for a couple years now, and had the it's been a pleasure to work with a company like Blue Rooster for the last 2 years, building things on top of SharePoint, which we can talk about if there's any questions or when we go down that thing. One thing that FedEx needed to put in place was a new solution. We are an extremely large company, as you can imagine. 300,000 employees, over 200 countries around the world, virtually every country there is. And so that being that disparate and that dispersed amongst the entire globe, we needed a way to collaborate and be productive amongst all those individuals, all those subject matter expertise that were out there just waiting to be tapped and collaborate amongst. So we looked at something that we really needed to implement, which was a collaborative solution. And that's when we started talking to Blue Rooster about what they're doing in the SharePoint space. And it's been quite a run. And we're about to go live here in the next couple of months for the entire enterprise. So it's been a wild ride. It's been very enjoyable, and we've done a lot so far. We'll talk about that, I'm sure.
And Bryan, what are some of the ways that you're doing this? What does this look like inside of your company?
It's interesting. It looks a lot like Blue Rooster's product called Sepulveda, because that's what we built it on. So it's got all the solutions that you might expect from the LinkedIn and the Facebooks and the Twitters and everything else. Products like our feature sets around microblogging and blogging, having a quote-unquote a board, as we call it, which is an interactive activity feed amongst all the people that you're following. So it's got following, it's also got gamification and a badge program. It's got a lot of things all in place to try to entice individuals to seek out other individuals and then to connect and collaborate with those people. So kind of going along the Nelson's Law, we're trying to throw it on its heels a little bit, where 1% generally are the people that create, 9% contribute, and 90% consume. We're trying to make that 1% grow well into the 9%, the 9% grow well into the 90%, rather than trying to make everybody as collaborative as possible, which we feel will drive productivity.
This obviously looks a lot like maybe Facebook, maybe flips on the vertical or horizontal. Kevin, why did you guys develop this with it looking so much like Facebook? Why not just tell companies to use Facebook?
So I think there's a couple key points here. So, this was a product we originally built on, for those of you who are into the SharePoint arena or the collaboration arena, this is built originally on SharePoint 2010, and there's a new product coming out next year by Microsoft that's really fantastic. But the whole issue here is, how do you drive adoption of a technology platform that's foreign to a lot of people? So we really, try to adopt the paradigm of, Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter, and really give people the tools that are very common in their day-to-day consumer life. And we hear a lot about consumerization of IT, bring your own device to work and that sort of thing. And I think, working with companies like FedEx that says, all right, we're gonna take this in small bites, and we're gonna try to consume this as we go. And our goal here is to give them tools that are going to be very similar to how people work in their day-to-day life. So when they get to work and they see something like this, they're not intimidated by a new paradigm.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Kevin. The adoption model was so key for us that when you have 300,000 people, you don't want to and can't, cost effectively at least, spend a lot of time training all those individuals, nor having a huge help center or anything else. So we wanted to layer in some easy to use user experience inside of our environment for people to, like you said, get in there day one and not have to mess with hunting and pecking to find out how things are working, to actually jump in there and start collaborating day one. So it's kind of why we chose the user interface that we did.
How does this address the privacy concerns?
Yeah, that is me. That's interesting that you asked that. I think one thing that differentiates many of the products that are out there right now are the ones that have been kind of cutting the edge in this space for a matter of years, haven't really taken into account Enterprise 2.0 or whatever the heck we're calling this thing now. The new Enterprise, the one where it's not just a free-for-all or anything like that. You actually have to implement a level of governance and information architecture and security. So the ideas of having a lot of software as a service or SaaS solutions out there for the cloud, for Box, and so on and so forth, it's great. Those are great solutions, but when you're looking at a company that's very, very high on its intellectual property and wants to keep that, and FedEx is not unique, that's every company in the world. When you want to keep that intact and make sure you're the master of that domain and keep everything in transit and at rest secured, you really need to bring something kind of in-house to do that. I don't think all the cloud solutions are quite there yet, although I'm seeing some fantastic things coming down the pipe. But that's a big issue, is we want to keep everything in control. So that's why FedEx decided to go in-house.
And there are companies that have had privacy breaches that have led to them adopting this. Kevin, you mentioned one company before when we were previously talking about this. Can you talk more about companies that have had issues with privacy that have led them to use solutions like this?
Yeah, I think there's, we use the term, and just prompted me to use it. We call it the Wild Wild West right now because, you're taking companies like FedEx that have a very long history of working in a very, controlled and silo environment. FedEx is 300,000 plus employees. You talk about, the GEs and the Pfizers and the Lillys and all these very large corporations. And you get into a discussion with IT or communications or marketing, and they're all excited. They want to do this. And then it bogs down in legal, and somebody in legal is just like, hey, we're not comfortable with this. We're not comfortable sharing information this way. What happens if it gets out? And I think, getting into an organization where you can keep something, for the time being on premise, where somebody can keep the content locked down, is very important. We were working with a very large consumer products company that had some information on a product release that was coming out, and it got out. And so their competition was able to beat them before that because somebody mentioned something about a product release. And I think those are some of the things that can set back this collaboration. And we're going to talk a little bit about planning in a minute, but really putting a plan in place for how you're going to address who can share information is really, really important.
And on that note, we talked about planning. And that's something that a company should do, is really put into place policies and procedures about how you're going to use these social collaboration tools. On that note, what is your advice for companies that they should do or don't do when adopting a platform?
Start.
Bryan, you want to take that one?
There's lots of do's and don'ts. I think some of the big ones are, both Kelly and Kevin have kind of touched on the word planning. You can't just start this thing out. We started out 2 years ago with building an actual workable, click-throughable, that's a new word, you can use it if you want, proof of concept that we carried around and met with anybody and everybody that would meet with us inside of FedEx to both sell this product in order to get funding to do the project, but also to get everybody high in collaboration, but also, as a third thing, is to identify those champions that we would need to plug into the solutions. We started planning very, very early on, and I think one of the biggest pitfalls that some companies can get into is not having the right people involved. So you can't do this in a vacuum. You really need to have corporate communications, marketing, and brand, those big three involved, and whether you want to or not, legal and HR, they're great people to work with. They just kind of have this, you think they're going to be difficult, but when you get into it, you really need their protection and their advice on how to do this, especially also with operations, because you're going to be interacting with people that work every day on, in our cases, delivering packages. You don't want to introduce anything that corrupts their time. You want to make them more productive, not less productive. So there's a lot of planning that really needs to go into this. This is not something that you could just flip on a switch and turn on and everybody using it in a day. You really need to kind of think it out.
Absolutely. And also, you mentioned productivity. What are some ways that companies should do or don't gauge productivity when implementing a social collaboration tool like this?
Well, I'll start with this one. You can probably add on this, but we work with a lot of different companies, and we have a couple examples. We have a couple good ones and a couple bad ones, but one of them was, big pharmaceutical company in the Midwest rolled out a big collaboration platform. This social paradigm shifting thing. We're going to get away from email, et cetera. And what they found was that the most visited site, the most talked about community was these three gals that put together a site about their cats and what their cats were doing. And I think those are the kind of things that can really really kill the initiative that's going on there. And we talked a little bit about planning, and I think somebody like FedEx who's gone in and said, hey, we're using this as a communication and collaboration tool is different than just kind of open up the barn doors and saying, hey, we got this tool for you, go ahead and use it. Let's give you some guidance. Let's tell you kind of what we want to use it for. What we're trying to do here is keep you from emailing documents around. Start a community, keep your documents there, get people to come in and join the community that you want or on your team and share information. I think those are some of the examples where we get involved and we help with communication. And I think FedEx really embraced this kind of, hey, we want it to be more than what did you have for lunch, or what was your bicycling route to work. Although very important in keeping the social fiber of a company going, we want to demonstrate value and collaboration. And I think some of that can get lost. And there's just a number of horror stories at some companies where the conversation gets off track here. And I just came back. I was in San Francisco yesterday for the Yammer Festival, the Yam Jam down there, and it was pretty cool. And they had a panel just like this when a very large company on stage, and they were talking about how they didn't have a plan in place. So when labor negotiations started, they got into this very nasty union bashing event going on this social communication platform, and that really is going to that's going to keep the conversation. Some people are going to be very intimidated then to step back in there. They're going to be shouted down, that sort of thing. So I think you can have the kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly here. And we really want to foster collaboration, foster communication, and we really want people to connect and not feel like they're shut out on that. So I think there's some things that can go sideways.
Yeah, we've introduced, and we're not alone in this, but the concept of a new function inside of FedEx called a community manager. And you're seeing this over, in a lot of the job searches out there these days, or at least it's growing in time quickly. It's a person that's out there that is in charge of actually helping the community collaborate, right? So for our company, we're trying to put out lots of these individuals across the entire globe to help each one of these individual areas understand how to best use the collaborative tools, because you can get into trouble very easily. So if you do some programs, some communications to kind of soften the beachhead, as we call it inside of FedEx, of getting people informed and educated and communicated to about what the solution is, how it's supposed to be used, but then having people that are there the whole time that can help communicate and craft communications in that regard and really start to foster a lot of collaboration. We found that to be a really good business model for us and the adoption model for collaboration as well.
What do you think are some of the best uses of this platform that foster collaboration?
One in particular that we've seen in our beta program, which we've been doing for the last couple of months with a couple of thousand individuals, is as soon as we turned it on to this one executive, he was in it immediately. And I don't know if y'all know, but we're involved in NASCAR and racing and a bunch of things. So, and this VP was actually in charge that area. So he starts a conversation around the race tour, then he starts a conversation around the data center that we just set up, then he starts a conversation about this, and now individual contributors, frontline individuals are talking to them. So he and I, the executive and I, had a conversation about how great it is for the first time to see these lines being erased between connections and access points between the frontline individuals like myself and the executives, right? So we can now interact with these individuals, and I think that's really a really cool sign of the way collaboration can work inside of an enterprise.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. It's amazing to us as well, and I don't care the company we've worked with, the org chart flattens to a horizontal line almost instantly, and because the executives are on there, and sometimes somebody may not know that person's an executive. If they're just commenting and their name is just popping up and not a title there, somebody may add a comment about somebody else is doing something differently. And we were just talking about this last week, and there was a company, and one of the GMs of this group sent out a note saying, "Hey, everybody, have a great weekend." And it was interesting to see the response rate that everybody kind of, I mean, this was just a one line, Friday afternoon. It was a great week. Everybody have a good weekend. And the amount of kind of team spirit that kind of came with that and kind of carried into. And so it was like, hey, listen, we weren't sharing a document. We weren't collaborating on anything. We were just building morale. And I think that is, it didn't cost them anything. They didn't have to do an offsite. They didn't, this was just somebody at a very senior level, just reaching out saying, have a good weekend. So I think at the basic level, when we start talking about, hey, how do you justify ROI, and how, who's going to pay for this, and all this other stuff, this company immediately put their finger on that, and they said, look, nobody knew that, there's a number of people knew he was a GM, but there was a lot of people that didn't know his role in the ecosystem.
So obviously, one of the hardest things is measuring the ROI from these platforms. How are you handling this at FedEx?
I think it's an incredibly difficult area to try to address cleanly. Let's put it that way. You're talking about social interaction. So how you measure social interaction? How do you tell someone in a matter of analytics or numbers that they're more productive or less productive because they're collaborating with someone? There's a whole new kind of push into sentiment analysis and content analysis around tagging. We've seen it in other spaces over many, many years, but now it's starting to be implemented inside the enterprise of who's tagging what, who's following what, who's searching for what connections are spawned or from those tags. So you can kind of follow history. So we're looking at what was traditionally basic web analytics, visitation, and what pages they're coming in on, what pages they're leaving on, how much time they're spending in these areas, and then adding in some of that sentiment and content analysis also to add in search criteria and everything else. But it still can be a very subjective set of measurements, so you have to properly qualify to your executives. So you can't walk in your executive and say, we had a 20% decrease in email, and directly attribute that to one thing. You can't say, well, we're not using the phone as much. You can say those things, but it's not necessarily a one-for-one. What is that? But the other thing to take into consideration is not everybody in your enterprise is going to be collaborating with everyone else. So what is the percentage of people collaborating compared to the people saving time, so on and so forth. So it's one of these things that's really starting to grow. I think people have built upon this collaboration solution, and they went, ROI, crud, we need to figure something out. So I think people are starting to do that now, and there's some tools out there and some products and some companies that are doing really well in that space. So we're looking at all that right now.
And actually, just yesterday, it was on a TechCrunch that another collaboration tool called National Field had just raised $1.5 million in funding. And what they're doing as part of their platform is they're building in kind of this gamification where users get points for how much they interact with their other colleagues. And one thing we just talked about is that the future of collaboration? Is this gamification, is this rewards going to be part of the future of these social collaboration tools? And Bryan, you mentioned that you're actually looking at ways that you can potentially build that into FedEx. Do you think that's the future of social enterprise?
I do, and I'll let Kevin talk on this too, because some of his team members and myself have had lengthy conversations around gamification and game design. I think between, it also plays into the measurements as well, is you have to kind of entice people to collaborate. You have to give them incentive in different ways, motivational, not around the traditional ways, but ones where they're almost doing it involuntary or subconsciously, right? So they're going out and they're sharing information, and then they get a badge. They weren't even expecting it. They're just getting a badge. I think everybody in here has had some sort of program where they've been involved in a social outside of an enterprise, maybe where they had some sort of gamification. It's the same thing. There's no different. It's all about human behavioral science and making sure someone understands why they're doing something and what the benefit is, right? So it's kind of, it's still a carrot in front of those individuals. So it's an interesting concept. I do believe it's going to drive a lot of collaboration.
Yeah, I think there's, just as a follow-on to that, I think anything we can do to, encourage people to participate on these platforms is really important. Facebook got adoption very, very quickly because you're conversing with your friends, and these platforms inside corporations tend to have less than robust adoption ramps, primarily because people are concerned about how people are going to view their comments. And I think, email is a very siloed conversation. It's one-to-one or one to just a few, and you usually know those people. You start putting your comments out in a corporate environment where your information can be read, there is an intimidation factor there. So I think doing things like, whatever we can do to encourage adoption is really important. But I also think, too, as we start to see some of these gamification things go more mainstream, we're going to drop the word gamification on this, and we're going to talk about, I just found an expert because this person has a badge, or this person is his comments are most, they're ranked the highest amongst other people's, ranking a comment and things like that. And I think those are the things that all of a sudden, you're working on a project, you're looking for information on how to build a proposal to sell a client. It's outside your area. You reach out to your corporate, your collaboration platform, and you say to the whole enterprise, hey, who has experience on this? Oh, and look at these people that came back with a ranking or some sort of point system or a badge system. Those are all really helpful making decisions on what information is going to be useful.
Absolutely. What are your final thoughts on what you're doing, what's the current state of social enterprise, what the future is? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, just a couple comments. So I was at this conference yesterday with Yammer, and huge kudos for Microsoft there. It's really exciting what's taking place there, and the amount of companies that are participating on a Yammer platform is pretty exciting. But the Gartner analyst was probably the most exciting for us to hear. And she came out and she was talking about where we're at, and she said, hey, look there's only 25% of the Fortune 500 companies even have a platform out there, or even some form of a Yammer feed or Jive that's out there, and Chatter's out there, and now we have this new company, National, that's very exciting. So I mean, it is definitely still the wild, wild west, and she even thought that the 25% number was a pretty robust number. She was counting even those ones and twos that are on Yammer that are part of a GE team or something like that. So we're still a long ways away from making this mainstream, making this kind of pervasive in the organization. So I think a lot of things are gonna change there, and I think companies like FedEx that are willing to come and talk at conferences and publish articles and talk about it really will help some of those very much mainstream companies adopt things like that. I mean, I know a number of the Fortune 500 companies based here in Seattle, they're looking at it. They haven't rolled it out yet. So I think we're starting to see where some of this stuff is just starting to happen, and it's pretty exciting.
It is. I also see the future of the enterprise opening up and its comfort zone a little bit. So right now, and we said it earlier, our companies, such as myself or my company that I work for, likes to keep control of their assets, right? Well, those are not the only individuals that we want to collaborate with. We want to collaborate with our customers as well. We want to have real-time experiences, and we already are, where we're using Twitter as a customer service model, but we want to expand on that with our sales organizations and everything else, so you can actually interact and identify the needs of our customers, plus if there's anything that we need to take care of on behalf of our customers. Because remember, we're the custodian of their product from one place to another, their package, so we want to make sure that we're delivering the best solution we possibly can. Also, our alumni network, all the people that have retired after 40 years or over the last 4 years, these are great wealths of information. Our vendors, we have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of vendors that we work with around the globe. So our 300,000 really represents more, double or triple. So these are all people that we want to interact with. So the ideas around keeping everything tight and moving towards things like Office 365 with SharePoint and Azure and Yammer and different things that can be plugged in onto that. Having a solution that our companies can work with other companies and our customers and everything else, kind of in a federated model, I think will be a big push over the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that comment too is, we talked about data and analytics and all that stuff, and when we first started working with FedEx, it was kind of fascinating to hear how they were connecting with, at the service level, a service level person connecting with their customers via Twitter. Okay, well then where does all that data then, where does all that roll up to, and how do we start to look at that information? And how does somebody in a different office know that that's the best practice now? And how do we share that information? And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get a means where you don't have to go in and load that information into a system for somebody else to read. It's pervasive. This is being consumed by another tool. Can we pull that Twitter feed in so somebody can else see how they're communicating with it? Can I use that as a template then? All I got to do is add the person I'm trying to send to. So that's a productivity increase. We see how people are using different things. And those are some of the things I think that are really interesting is, we've been talking about this now for a long time. It's like, where is all this data going and how can we roll this into, and we refer to it in the industry as, BI, and I think that term gets so overused, but, the analytics of what we're doing right now, it's mind-boggling, and even a company like FedEx getting their arms around, okay, how are we sharing information and what information are we sharing? And some of it's over on an open platform, Twitter, some of it's going out without any sort of corporate communications approval on it, and that's really where we want to see all that information, so people can share that.
Obviously, this is a growing industry. It's very complex. It's not widely adopted, but it's growing 25%. Right now, we'd like to turn this over to you guys. If you have any questions for any of us, Kevin, Bryan, myself, there's microphones out there.
If not, Kevin's going to sing.
No, I'm not.
Do we need to pass out microphones, or just stand and talk, shout, stand up and shout, sing, dance? Okay, I guess just come up here.
So I have a couple of questions. Thanks so much. One of my questions is totally self-serving, but have you taken advantage of the tool to do research, like internally, whether it's employee satisfaction kind of stuff or any of that kind of stuff? Actually,
we have. We've done an alpha release and a beta release, and we're going to be rolling out in our full production environment in the next couple of months to everyone. We've already done a couple of surveys and got the results back, and we were quite pleased with what we did. We spent a lot of time over the last year and a half coming up with an authoritative design that actually had input from a large variety. So we did usability testing. A few of us became actually usability certified individuals. So we did a lot to put into it, and then we wanted to measure how well we did, and we did pretty well. And I was happily surprised by that. So yes, we have used some surveys and different things.
Also, too, really important in the process of bringing that design to life is for those of us in the UX design space, we use a card sorting process where we're reaching out to a very large population. Give us your feedback on what you need, what you want. So, we're not designing inside a bubble either. And really, for each corporation, it's kind of amazing to me. We've done hundreds of these projects. There isn't a single project that has the same look and feel to it, and the design that we did for FedEx was so unique to their culture. And in case you couldn't tell, he's from Memphis, and so Bryan has that, that's and NASCAR's a big deal. I
want to know what you mean by that.
Okay, NASCAR. I'm from Atlanta, so
yeah. So I think the research that goes into, this is a 2-year project. This is a really big deal, so it does take some planning.
Well, and I was just thinking too, kind of longer term, when you think about all these communities that you've created, you can think about potentially utilizing them for concept design testing or employee initiatives or any of that kind of stuff.
Ideation is something we really, really are looking into, and are going to be able to be building a community for that pretty soon. So that's a big deal for us.
When you talk about opening it up a little more to customers, or just opening it up in general, are employees going to be able to? Can employees access the platform on their personal devices?
We have just implemented BYOD, or in a pilot phase. I got my new iPhone sitting in my pocket, so I'm all excited about it. Got rid of the BlackBerry. So yes, they can on those devices using the software that we have. Okay. So it's kind of yes and no.
That's a huge deal too, making sure that regardless of where that employee is connecting, and we refer to them as clients, regardless of where your client's connecting, they can get to the information.
The last question. I'm sorry if anybody else wants to ask questions. The last one I had was just about, we talk a lot about generational differences or life stage differences and levels of adoption, right? And there's this kind of assumption that if you're over maybe 45 or 50, you're not going to be as quick to adopt tools like this as somebody in their 20s or even 30s. So are you seeing those?
You haven't met my mom, have you?
Or my dad. I mean, that's, like I said, that's a big stereotype right now. I'm wondering if that's bearing out for you.
It is a stereotype. I mean, we've been in business for 40 years, and we have people that are celebrating their 35th, 36th anniversary, which is fantastic, right? It's surprising, the designs that are out there right now and the ones that we employed with Sepulveda, with our look and feel and everything else, really the adoption was no harder or easier for that generation versus this generation versus that generation. It was, everybody was either going to adopt it or not. It was more of a mindset whether you were going to want to be willing to do it or not. It had nothing to do with age, with what we found out, which is actually not what I was originally thinking. So I think today we're so integrated with technology, everybody's got it, that the adoption really transcends lines. Now, the amount of work and where you want to work and how the access to the information, the BYOD and everything else, yeah, that does. The new college graduates definitely want to work out in the free world as opposed to in an office, and so that does factor in there.
Yeah, I think the the implementation of the iPhone when it first came out really talks to the point that UX, user experience matters. Here's a very complicated device, I'm going to give it to you, you're going to use it right away, and I think that's really key.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I'd like to hammer on the adoption question a little bit. So when it comes to relying on gamification for stuff like finding experts, you're most likely to only get information about the most active users of the social network, not necessarily the most appropriate people. How are you addressing the problem of platform adoption, just widespread? I used to be at a company where we tried to get Yammer going. It just didn't happen. Yeah,
it's a great point. So and this is some of the stats that even came out yesterday, that even on a Yammer platform, their adoption isn't nearly, in a 50,000 person company, they may have 2,500 people on Yammer. Well, that's a pretty small subset of the people that are, that you want to reach out to. And I think not trying to do a product plug here for Microsoft or for SharePoint or even for our solution at this panel, but you have to be able to, when you're doing your search for who you're looking for, and I don't care if it's just a badge or a star ranking or what, thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever. You got to reach out to beyond that social network, and I think you need to surface results on people that have maybe posted in a document library somewhere, a slide deck or a Word document or something of that nature that you can reference, and maybe then you're reaching out outside that collaboration platform to find out who the expert is. And I think we've seen a huge rush in the enterprise space on search, and search is still a very big deal. And if you're not indexing all the content out there and you're just relying on that collab platform, you're probably going to have failure.
Yeah, that's a perfect statement about the search, right? So regardless of whether you're using collaboration, your names are associated with documents. So because we're using SharePoint, and this is a big reason why we chose it, you're in that space. So when we index those documents, we're still finding the subject matter experts because they were the original authors of this content that was out there. Now, they might not be willing to collaborate upon it inside that space, but they're certainly going to answer the phone and do email. I'm going to take an old political statement, it's not that old, 1,000 points of light, and kind of turn it on its head too. The idea is that what we wanted to do was pretty much provide our champions with a bunch of flashlights, if you can think about it. So they're going to be involved inside the solution, and they're one step closer to the other individuals that may not be involved. And it's twofold. One is they can champion the utilization of the collaboration solution, or they can at least get you're one step closer to finding out that true subject matter expert, and they can plug you in through another means. So yes, you kind of run the risk of not having everyone involved, meaning not all the subject matter expertise are there, but you're one step at least closer to those subject matter experts, maybe if they aren't there.
Thanks.
So you guys touched on this a little bit with the bring your own device. I'm curious, FedEx is a huge company with a lot of people who don't spend 8 hours a day behind a computer. How do you design for them in a different way? Do you think about how they might, those folks who are, I don't know, in whatever capacity, whether they're out driving trucks or whether they're in distribution centers or whatever, right, how they interact with the network? Yeah,
so we have taken an approach of utilizing the user interface and the UX that was workable in a mobile space, right? So we kind of didn't spend a lot of time optimizing or developing a responsive design for each kind of platform, although that's where we want to move to, and that was a part of a big of our version 2.0, which is going to start here in a matter of days, working with solutions like Sepulveda's mobile products and everything else, of saying, yes, we do need to understand what tools they need by what their job functions are, and trying to build some sort of responsive design and response to those solutions. So it's a conversation that we're having right now more than anything else.
Yeah, and I think too, to add on to that, I'll just comment. We were working with a very large automaker, Chrysler, and they were reaching out to their alumni network, their retired network, and their goal was to stop mailing them information. So they wanted to build this portal to say, look at, and I think actually one of your goals too was HR said we'd really like to not have to mail HR information out. We'd really want people to consume this off of the web. And so Chrysler did a study on trying to do some ROI on this new portal that they were building, and they figured out that they had about $2.5 million in mailing costs every year. So all of a sudden you can start looking at, what's the mailing cost here? What's the cost to process that? There's some soft costs in there. Some of that's already sunk costs. So then you can start having an ROI discussion and start having that. And if you design it and build it right, then you should have a means and a tool that's really easy to adopt. What's better when you go to a government agency and you can download a form, print it out, fill it out, mail it in, that sort of thing, or even do it electronically. And I think that's where some of these big companies are looking at too. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to, if you're just doing a simple change of address update that you have to be mailed information. I mean, this is really old school stuff that we take really in our industry for granted. Now we're just trying to bring some of these companies along.
Any other questions? We have a few minutes.
So just a couple of comments too that I want to make. This is it's a pretty fun industry we're going into, and I think all of us that are in this conference we're definitely kind of on the forefront of it. And I think whatever we can do to foster the dialogue and spread the word, I think that's kind of what we're trying to do here as well.
Yeah, I agree totally. It's one of those things where a couple years ago when I left the consulting space to come back to FedEx to do this project, it was really interesting to me because I felt like they were going to cut the edge again, like FedEx has done so many times before. And it's really kind of the beginning stages of a lot of these things, and it's a pretty exciting time to be involved in this and to work with a large company like I do, and work with small companies like I get to do, work with good product bases like SharePoint and everything else. I mean, everybody has their downsides, everybody has their upsides as far as product goes, but I think there's a movement starting amongst this space of not making everyone just kind of do their job, but everyone collaborating with each other to do their job better. And I think that's really cool.
So I have one last question for you guys. What was the biggest challenge that you encountered when first adopting this at FedEx?
Governance is the biggest thing. I don't want to say that it's difficult, but it's time consuming and it's labor intensive. So it's one thing to say, I'm a company and I'm just going to turn on Yammer and utilize it for what it's worth, right? Which is a lot. It's different if you want to really ingrain and integrate a collaborative solution inside of Enterprise 2.0 model. You have to take into account that the German Work Council and areas in Europe have specific rules. We're a multimodal organization, so we do everything but ship on boats, and I'm sure that's not too far off. But it's one of those things that we have different rules that we have to abide by with different government agencies around the world. So it was probably our most difficult thing to deal with, but we had some great lawyers in place to help us do that.
Yeah, I think from our perspective at much higher level, the things that impede these discussions and moving this along is definitely a legal one, and that's usually what happens right away is why are we doing this? We have email. Let's keep it to that. The organizations that we deal with, they're pretty excited when they allow IM to take place inside an organization, and they think that's pretty progressive. And you'd be amazed at the number of companies that have to retrieve and hold and store and keep that stuff for multiple years. So IT departments get very scared when you say, hey, we want to have a Facebook-like experience in the enterprise and share this information. And they're like, well, we can't really track that, and there's no way, to put it in a silo and really manage that. So we really have to be careful with, trying to, boil the ocean on the first pass. Let's give them something to try and use and roll that out there. And I think, things like Yammer and Jive and some of these other things that are just now starting to gain adoption, they're really helpful in kind of pushing that frontier, and we just have to get teams like, legal, definitely okay with kind of where we're going with this information, and we don't want to have a lot of those, off chart, union discussions where people are yelling and screaming at each other online, because that's definitely going to hinder the development of kind of where we want to go. So I think that's a big one.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you coming today.
Thank you for being
Thanks.
here.